Welcome to the Disruption Podcast, everybody. I am your host, Alex Sikma, with my other host, Ben Bessett. And we are in Grand Rapids in the Pilgrim's Well studio. And today we are talking about blaming it on the genes. We're talking about the theory of how what you eat, who you're born into, determines what you do. And this is what's being taught today. So we're going to talk about biological determination. Is it true? Because many people are talking about it, and it might be a concern that people might have. Or is it false, and what are the implications of it? And this is all coming up next.
See, logic is universal. It's everywhere at once. It's immaterial, and everybody uses it in the same way. They claim Christians are dogmatic. We follow a certain set of rules, but so do they.
Yeah.
So we both do. They just don't admit it. We do. We don't refer to ourselves as it's. Nobody ever says it when they refer to themselves. They say I. Nobody ever talks to you and say it. They refer to you. So we have specific words that we use that indicate that we are individual people. And so if we're biologically determined, why have any type of debate or any type of discussion at all? It's useless. So your brain is coming to atheism. My brain is coming to Christian theism. So then if we want to be consistent, why argue? Why value one over the other when they're both equal?
This is Disruption. Okay, so I have this dilemma. Let's just say that I was having a conversation with somebody, and this person was talking about how everything that we do, usually this is what happens. Somebody will read a book, read one book, or read one online article, and it totally changes their life. Or listen to a podcast episode, and it has to do, let's just say in this situation, this guy is listen to this one podcast episode, read this article, and it was talking about how everything that we do has already been predetermined by what we eat, what we, who we're our genes, and all of this plays into the decisions that we make. It's already all been predetermined. There's no free will aspect to this at all. And I would have to say, if I had that conversation with somebody, I'd feel kind of uncomfortable because, first of all, I can't really put my finger on it, but it just doesn't seem like this would be a good perspective to have. It seems like it would have a lot of negative implications, and I just don't know if I believe this. But I don't know what I would say to this person. I don't know how I would help them. So let's just begin with helping the audience and me to flesh out this idea of what is biological determinism.
Sure. So biological determinism is the belief that free will is an illusion and that the soul does not exist. So we've been taught that human beings have souls because we have a Christian influence, but that can't be scientifically verified. It's a religious concept. Free will is not real. These things have been taught in the past, but as scientific knowledge is advancing, the determinist will say that free will and the soul is just an illusion. So everything that takes place in the brain. There is no immaterial soul that we have. So philosophical naturalism, atheism, secular humanism, whatever term you want to use to describe this, wants to make everything material. So there's nothing immaterial. Everything is material. So how do we account for our thoughts and our emotions and our belief? Brain chemistry. So that's pretty much what biological determinism has to offer. There is no you. There is no immaterial self. So what you do has already been predetermined, and you've mentioned a couple of them, by our genes, by our brain chemistry, by the glucose levels that we have, by our upbringing. All of these play a factor, and these are the determining antecedent causes that play an effect onto how we think. So there's no human soul. It's just the brain doing what it's doing.
This is kind of seems dangerous to me when you think about this, because it's already I'm just thinking about, somebody might ask the question, is there anything wrong with oversimplifying maybe complex human behavior and boiling it down to like one simple explanation. And I just kind of think, if you're an atheist, why even ask that question? Like, why even come to it? You don't really believe in right and wrong. I mean, think about it. If I'm an IT guy and I've got an overcomplicated piece of technology that's not doing what I want it to do, it's really easy. I just like rip it out and replace it with something simpler, something easier. And it just gets the job done in the right way. But you can't do that with human beings. You can't just treat human beings like they're just mechanical, like chemical, just like that's all that it is biologically. Like they're just these things that we can just, you see what I mean? It's kind of, this is a
right. So they want to
issue.
Quantify everything.
Yeah,
they want to make everything mechanical, everything determined. So this is what philosophical naturalism naturally leads to. So it's within their worldview. So you can't veer off to the immaterial. You can't veer off and explain God. Those are not allowed on the table. So if we're going to analyze human behavior, we have to analyze it from mechanistic circumstances. So the human body is a complete mechanical system, no different in its essence or principles than any other physical system. So what we're seeing here, the result of this is then what do you do with blame and punishment? So if we are nothing more than what our brains are determining us to be, blame and punishment for wrong actions doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Because there's no other, you're doing what your brain is telling you to do. Praise and reward make no sense. So you did a good job. Well, that's just how I have been determined to act.
Yeah.
You're simply doing what the necessary antecedent causes are bringing about in your mind. So human choice and responsibility are an illusion. And getting rid of free will is a wonderful thing. It makes us more humane. So this is what you're left with. If you start with nothing, if you start with everything is mechanical, everything is material, we've evolved from random processes over millions of years, you're left with this. If God is not allowed on the table, if the supernatural is not allowed on the table, if the human soul does not exist, you have to account for why human beings do what they do. This is what one of the options that you're left with.
Do you have more on the
we have questions
definition?
now.
More questions.
So there's a couple things we want to consider with this. That being the foundation, just a very thumbnail sketch of what biological determinism is. The first question we want to consider is, if all our thoughts are nothing more than chemical reactions within the brain, how can you trust them?
Yeah.
If our brain is nothing more than an evolved organ of random chance over millions of years, how can we trust that it's functioning correctly or it's functioning in a good manner? So we have this issue of trust. And atheists place reason at the top. Well, how do we know our reason is valid? How do we know our reason is good? How do we know our reason is sound? And they say by using reason to compare with reason. So now you have a circular argument. Now, all arguments end up being circular when you go back to its ultimate authority. But if reason is your ultimate authority and you don't have any standard to verify if your human reason is good, moral, immoral, right, wrong, or sound, you're just left with blind trust that it evolved the way it is, and it evolved in a good way or in a functional way. So that's the first question. The second question is, atheists love to refer to logic and to reason as their source of authority. So if our thoughts are nothing more than predetermined reactions to the neurological movements within our brains, we are not the ones doing the reasoning. We are not the ones doing the thinking. We're not the ones deducting, using induction, thinking, making judgments, apprehending objects. All of this is something that is within our brains. It's the chemicals, it's the neurons, it's the reactions going up here. There is no self that is thinking through these things. So our brains are doing all the work because there is no you. There is no soul. So how does an atheist then account for the use of the immaterial laws of logic that govern our thoughts? See, logic is universal. It's everywhere at once. It's immaterial, and everybody uses it in the same way. But if we're nothing more than individual brains with individual chemicals, then you would think each person would have their own laws of thought, and they would all vary with each other, but they don't. The laws of logic are everywhere, and they're used universally. How do you account for that? The laws of logic are immaterial. They're not made of matter. But the philosophical atheist is a materialist who says that all things are matter. So how do you account for immaterial laws of logic as your source, as your basis for foundation for knowledge and reality, when it's immaterial and it's abstract and it's universal? So you have some huge problems here, huge gaps when you think these things through, of accounting for something that isn't material when you are a materialist, accounting for how these universal laws impact your thinking when our thinking is nothing more than brain chemistry. So how do immaterial laws interact with the brain chemistry to get us to do what we do? So there's a lot of leaps, there's a lot of faith, there are a lot of things that cannot be empirically verified in a laboratory that atheists hold to. Even though they're the ones who say they're the empiricists, they're the ones who say they're in touch with reality because everything can be examined, everything can be before us, or it's an axiomatic truth. So we have these things to think through, and when you think these things through on an individual basis, you end up seeing that there are a lot of holes that they just can't account for.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting that, I don't know why atheists think that, I don't know what it is, but atheists kind of have this idea that Christians don't do science,
right,
or like they can't do science.
Right.
It's like, we can do science. It's just that I think the naturalist atheist, what they're thinking is, actually their thinking is very, I had an anthropology professor who said to the class that they're kind of dumb. Almost in a sense of, I mean, I'm trying not to say that insultingly, but they're kind of dumb in the sense that they can only think of the human person as one thing, or they can almost think of doing, like, understanding the universe as one thing, that it's purely science, that it's purely physical, empirically thought out, and different things are proven. And that's all that the naturalist sees. But they're not seeing, like you're saying, they're not taking for account the spiritual side of things, and they don't understand. They can't speak to that at all.
Well, they don't want to. They have a dogma that they follow. They claim Christians are dogmatic. We follow a certain set of rules, but so do they.
Yeah.
So we both do. They just don't admit it. We do.
Yeah.
So it's interesting here. Here's a third question to consider. If an atheist is determined to believe what they believe, so if you're biologically determined to believe what you believe and you're an atheist, and I'm biologically determined to believe what I believe and I'm a Christian, why argue? Because it's nothing more than the result of my brain versus the result of your brain.
Yeah.
So if we're biologically determined, why have any type of debate or any type of discussion at all? It's useless. So our thoughts are not our own, it's what our brains are doing. Mm-hmm. So your brain is coming to atheism, my brain is coming to Christian theism. So then if we want to be consistent, why argue? Why value one over the other when they're both equal? Why say one is foolish and stupid and the other is rational and sound when they're both equal, when they don't have any external basis other than what it itself is doing? Mm-hmm. So when an atheist comes to biological determinism, and that's where they plant their flag, and then turn around and make fun of the Christian or call the Christian stupid for believing what they believe, well, the Christian is only doing what their brain is telling them to do. Mm-hmm. So then how can you cast any type of a judgment when we are biologically determined to believe and think the way we do?
It's almost funny, like the Christians have a way to justify why they're debating the atheist, but the atheist doesn't have... It doesn't have the reason. Like, why are they arguing?
That's exactly. Yeah.
We should be arguing.
We should be. But the interesting thing is, the atheist is more passionate to prove the non-existence of God than the Christian is to demonstrate the consistency of God, that He does exist. It's just when you take God off the table and you suppress Him, and you exchange that truth for whatever truth you want to believe in. Every single day, you're bound and determined to push God further away. Mm-hmm. God leaves you over to your own desire to do that. So that would be the third question. And the fourth one is, what do you do with human responsibility and actions? Yeah. So what Hitler did, was that just his brain chemistry? He was determined to do that. He had no choice in the matter. What about the love between a husband and a wife? Is that real? Is that genuine? Or is that just what one spouse's brain is doing and then the other spouse's brain is doing, and then another spouse decides to leave one, and then it's not their fault because that's their brain chemistry? What about people who are working hard and are successful and other people who aren't doing anything? Both are equal. One isn't better than the other. One isn't taking responsibility while the other person is being lazy. So then that's just their brain chemistry. You can't fault them for that. And finally, what about the criminal in court, the rapist, the murderer who's standing before the judge? And the judge says, well, we can't find fault. We can't punish. That's just what his environment was. He was a product of that. That's just his brain chemistry. We can't find fault in the individual. That's just what he has done. So there's a lot of problems here when you flush this out as to why biological determinism cannot account for reality, the way we live, the way we are as human beings. It's just insufficient.
Is this still kind of something that's popular in philosophy, or I should say maybe psychological circles? Is biological determinism still like a major discussion?
It's popular. You see a lot of the atheists today talking about it.
Yeah. Say Richard Dawkins.
I'm not sure about Richard Dawkins. He may be. I know Sam Harris and Alex O'Connor are big on this. There's other atheists who are. I think what happens is people who haven't studied philosophy or have thought these things out, when they are introduced to biological determinism, they don't have a way out. They don't have a way of refuting it. They're not grounded in metaphysics or epistemology. So when they hear it for the first time, they're like, whoa, well, what if that is true? How do I refute this? And they can't. So then it's kind of a fear that takes over. And then after a while, it's, well, what if it's true? And then they kind of just slide down that path. So if you're not grounded and if you haven't been introduced to anything else and you hear this for the first time, yeah, it's going to make sense because you have nothing to oppose it. So we as Christians, where do we start? With the ultimate authority is the voice of God, and God speaks through Scripture. So the question then is how do we know we have a mind or a soul? Do we turn to science? Well, you can't really use science as a determining factor empirically because the soul is immaterial. You can't put the soul in a test tube. You can't put the soul under a microscope. You can't weigh it because it's immaterial. So then how do we know? So biblically speaking, we go back to Genesis. Genesis 2:7. The Lord God formed man out of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living creature. So we have the body, God breathing into our nostrils. Now that's the soul, that's the immaterial part of us. So here we see the composite of both body, soul. And with the soul, what do we have? Being created in God's image, we have intellect, emotion, and will. The intellect, the emotion, and the will is coming from the soul. Now, we're not saying that the brain doesn't play a part in our thinking, but it's a composite, it's a unit. They're working together. If you take the soul out and have the brain, it's not going to work. So it says God created us as a composite. So Matthew 22:37, Jesus says this, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. So Jesus is not only confirming that we have these things, but we have a will. And what I think he's doing here is with heart, soul, and mind, that being interchangeable, the immaterial part of us, the heart, the soul, the mind, we are to, with our will, with our affections, with our intellect, with our emotions, to love God with everything that we have. He's speaking about the immaterial aspect of humanity. And also Jesus says in Matthew 10:28, don't fear those who can kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Rather fear him who can destroy both soul and body in hell. So there Jesus is clearly making the distinction that there is a immaterial aspect of it, not just the body, but both the body and the soul.
I was curious about when you go back to Genesis, how do people know that when it says God breathes into his nostrils and became a living being, that's talking about the soul? Like I used to think growing up that was just oxygen, but it's like, how do we know that when God is saying he's like breathing into a human being, that we're talking about God is putting a soul in that human being? Well,
because the verse clearly, it says that, what's the result of it? We became a living creature. Oh. So the body is there. He breathes into our nostrils. Now we have life. Mm-hmm. So where does human life come from? You're alive. I'm alive. When we die, the soul separates from the body. Well, here the Lord's putting the soul into the body by breathing into the nostrils. So we became alive. So God is the origin of life. So we're becoming alive here at this point, which means the soul is becoming a part of who we are. The composite is now complete of soul and body.
Okay.
So what you're seeing here is the body, God forming the man out of the dust of the ground. Okay, so there's the body, but it's not alive. He breathes into the nostril, and now we become alive.
For some reason, I just thought it was like because of the word breath. I thought it was just like, I don't know, like breathing for the first time or something like that.
Well, it resulted in us breathing. I mean, we became alive at that point. So biblically speaking, we have this. What about philosophically speaking now? So if we want to talk to people who, that's just your religion, that's just your Bible, that's just, okay. So what else do we have that we can bring to the table to show the inconsistency in how biological determinism is irrational?
Yeah.
So we have the analytic philosophers. They commonly distinguish between three aspects of the mind. And these three aspects of the mind, a materialist, a naturalist, an atheist has a very hard time dealing with the reality of these, which is why they go to biological determinism. So any mental phenomenon, anything that's happening in the mind, so to speak, is a serious blow. It's something that materialism really struggles with. So what are these three things? Rationality, consciousness, and intentionality. Okay? So what is rationality? Rationality is the ability for us to think, put together sentences, and reason logically. So we're staying within the bounds of reason and rationality. So we have that ability to self-reflect. So we have rationality. The second one is consciousness. We are aware of our existence. We are aware of our environment. So we have the ability to self-reflect. There's awareness here. We're not just robots. We're not just machines. We have the ability to think things through. And the third one that we see is that we are alive. Sorry, this is still with consciousness. We're alive. We experience emotion, pain, pleasure, happiness, and sadness. So this is what being consciously alive means. Which brings us to the third one is intentionality, meaning we have purpose, we have will, and we're moving towards a goal. Everything that we see in the surrounding world, there's a purpose. We came here for a purpose. The person on the road driving is driving for a purpose. Every morning we get up, we have purpose. So we're seeing that there is an intention behind the act. It's not just a chemical reaction happening within our brain that causes us just to go in that motion, but we're self-reflecting, we're thinking, and then after we think, we do, because there is intentionality behind what we do. And only an act of a mind can have intentionality. There's a purpose and the reason for why we're doing what we're doing. So what are some things that biological determinism cannot account for? It can't account for beliefs, desires, thoughts, intentions, and attitudes. I have my own beliefs. I have my own thoughts. I have my own attitude. I have my own personality. So do you. So to say that this is just nothing but chemicals in the brain, again, we have to go back to rationality and intentionality and consciousness. What is life? So a human being, what makes a human being alive as opposed to dead? If you're a biological determinist, how do you answer that question?
Yeah. Well, the person's just not
the brain,
moving anymore.
The brain stops
the brain
working.
Stops,
yeah, it's hard to do. So the atheist has to attempt to make the immaterial into material, to make the qualitative quantitative. That's what they try to do, based solely on brain chemistry. It's one thing for the neurological process to bring about something, like we just talked about. But it's another thing for us to use logic, to deduct, to infer, to abstract, to comprehend, to memorize. All of these are the intentions of a will. All of these are signs of an intellect. All of these are showing us that there is an I, a me, an individual person within inside of us who are abstracting and thinking through these things. So biological determinism can bring you to a point, but then what happens when you go from that point and start thinking and start deducting and start reasoning through something? That is showing intentionality and a will, something that biological determinism can't really account for. Brain chemistry cannot do this on its own. There has to be a soul, there has to be a mind, there has to be an I, there has to be a person within us that's working alongside with our brain, the body and the soul together functioning as one composite unit as the way God has created us to interact.
A person within a person.
Well, there's a person within the body. There's not two persons, right? But there would be a person within the body, not just the body, not just the chemicals. So then what do we have from human experience? We have what are referred to as indexicals. which are referring to oneself. That's what an indexical is. These indicate self-awareness. So words like I, here, now, there, then. Those are indexicals. Here and now, what do here and now indicate? They're indicating where I am right now. I'm here with you at this table. There and then are indicating what I am not right now. I was there then. So we use these words all the time, and we don't even think about how important these words are or what we are actually saying when we're using these words. So the word now, it's the most basic one. A person is immediately aware of their existence. In order to be aware of your existence, you have to exist. So if you exist, that means you don't not exist. See what I mean? The opposite can't be true. If I exist, that means I can't not exist. I have to exist. So we can start from that premise. So the very person is the possessor of a mind and a body. We don't refer to ourselves as its. Nobody ever says it when they refer to themselves. They say I. Nobody ever talks to you and say it. They refer to you. So we have specific words that we use that indicate that we are individual people and not just things. We're not its. If an individual with self-awareness did not exist, if we did not have an immaterial mind and we were just our brains, then a purely physical description would be how we refer to one another. A body. But we don't do that. It, you, then, now, we have indexicals that we use that indicate that, yes, there is a person within us. We have to refer to the body then as the third person. So, for example, have you ever described yourself as a person who's maybe, there's a body that's 6 feet tall, 210 pounds? Or do you say, I am 6 feet tall, 210 pounds?
Yeah, you'd say I or you or like a person.
Right. You refer to yourself. You use the indexical. Do you ever say it experiences hunger right now, or do you ever say I am hungry?
I am hungry.
I am hungry.
Yeah.
But if we're biologically determined, why wouldn't we just say it is hungry? It is tired. Refer to it as an object rather than I myself am hungry right now. I need to go eat. You need to feed me because I'm not capable of feeding. I, you, we're using these words.
So that doesn't like prove it. That though, like it doesn't prove that we're not biological, but it is like maybe a logical explanation.
Well, what it's
like,
showing is that there is a person within us.
Yeah.
Why would we be doing that if there isn't a person within us? We would be referring to ourselves as it, not I.
Right.
Right?
Huh. Yeah.
So it was born January 1st, 2000, or I was born January 1st, 2000.
Yeah,
I. So even in the way we communicate, but the atheist will argue just like you did. The atheist will say, well, that doesn't prove, well, that doesn't prove, well, that doesn't prove. But what it's demonstrating is it's inconsistent to think of ourselves as being biologically determined.
Right.
It's inconsistent with reason. It's inconsistent with how we live. We can't live like that. We can't live without responsibility. We can't live without choice. We can't live without making decisions and being responsible and held accountable for those decisions. We're not just material. So it's showing us that our very nature of life and the way we interact and communicate demonstrates that there is a person within the body. What they're really good at doing is straining at a gnat and swallowing a camel. They're really good at trying to put the burden of proof on the Christian, saying, well, that doesn't prove this, that doesn't prove that. But then they can make wide speculations as being biologically determined and then say, oh, this is all scientific, and then people swallow that up.
Huh. Yeah. That's really, so they're very nitpicky when it comes to Christianity, like in every other aspect. They're like, oh, well, this little tiny contradiction over here, or this little tiny contradiction over here. But it's like, or this little generalization. I'm like, well, you're making these massive generalizations. Right. Yeah, wow, that's so interesting. I never thought about the English language, or I mean just language in general. Like the way we talk about ourselves and the way we communicate seems to show that we see something different about the human being. It's not like a machine that people make. There's something different, or from a person and an invention. Like there's something.
Yeah, like I don't value my lawnmower like I would value my wife, right?
Right.
Yeah, I maintain the lawnmower because I want it to work for its functional purpose. But there's no intrinsic value in it. I'm not treating it inhumane when I leave it out so the rain hits it and washes it off.
Yeah.
But you'd never do that with a human being. You'd never treat them that way. When we cry injustice, when we cry out, that's not fair. What we're showing is that human beings have dignity. Human beings have value. That we're not just a clump of cells with, just a bunch of atoms that just have randomly come together and now we're just biologically determined, but that human beings have value. We need to be preserved. We need to be protected. We need to treat each other with love, care, compassion. If we're just biologically determined and I'm just doing what my brain is doing, there's no responsibility. There is no repercussions. You can't fault me for anything because I'm just doing what my brain is telling me to do. So then how do you create value in human nature if we are just a clump of cells that are biologically predetermined to do what we do?
Yeah. You're not just a pack of neurons.
Right.
Thank you guys for joining us on this episode of Disruption. We'll see you in the next episode. You've been listening to the Disruption Podcast, where we disrupt the culture and place Jesus at the center of it all. If you enjoyed the show, please consider subscribing from wherever you are. You can also follow us on Instagram. Once again, thank you so much. We'll see you on the next episode.